This video is the first of three that is going to look at how devolution works in three nations within the United Kingdom, that being Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. First up is Scotland. And the reason for that is that the Scottish Parliament has had the most powers in terms of those devolved assemblies from the very beginning. First of all, it was originally the only of those three assemblies to be named a parliament. In Northern Ireland and Wales, we had assemblies, whereas in Scotland, from 1998 onwards, we had a Scottish Parliament. And it had the most powers from the very beginning in terms of the power to raise taxes and so-called primary legislative powers. So that means in certain areas of policy, the Scottish Parliament had the primary power in areas of policy such as health, education and transport. I'll give you an example of those primary powers later. The Scottish Parliament is based at Holyrood in Edinburgh, and it has been there since 2004. The MSPs, as they are known, were in temporary accommodation before that. Now, in Scotland, the electoral system used to elect MSPs is the additional member system. So there's a bit of a link to electoral systems here. And as you know, the AMS system is a combination of first past the post and proportional representation. 73 MSPs are elected via first past the post, 56 regional members. The First Minister of Scotland, as of 2023, is Hamza Yousaf, and prior to that, he is the sixth First Minister of Scotland. The first three all belong to the Scottish Labour Party. So you've got Donald DeVar, Henry McLeish and Jack MacDonald. Those three individuals were the First Ministers of Scotland from 1999 to 2007. However, in 2007, Scotland gets its first SNP, First Minister, in the form of Alex Salmond, then Nicola Sturgeon from 2014 to 2023, and now Hamza Yousaf. And we're going to talk about growing nationalism and an independence movement in Scotland, and the dominance of the SNP since 2007 is one of the signs of the Scottish people increasingly wanting nationalist or possibly even independent politics from the United Kingdom. So let's look at where Scotland and the Scottish Parliament gets its powers from. And handily enough for us, there are three acts, all known as the Scotland Act, that we need to look at. One passed in 1998, 2012 and 2016. So the first Scotland Act in 1998 established the Scottish Parliament with primary legislative powers. Now that is something that the Welsh Assembly did not have at the time and something that the Northern Irish Assembly still doesn't have. Now these primary legislative powers were in areas of law and order, health, education, transport and the environment. But also income tax could be varied by 3p for every pound, and that was known as the Scottish variable rate. So you could pay different taxes as a Scottish citizen, and the Scottish Parliament from the outset had the ability to introduce those different tax rates. In 2012, those tax raising powers were increased from 3p in the pound to 10p in the pound, and that was then known as the Scottish rate of income tax. It also permitted the Scottish Government to borrow up to £5 billion to set up its own tax authority, Revenue Scotland. And remember that public spending of all forms doesn't come without a cost. And so the ability of the Scottish Government, the Scottish Executive, to raise tax money in significant amounts allowed for public spending initiatives. And again, I'll give you an example of that later on. 2016 saw a major transfer of powers from Westminster to Holyrood. It gave the Scottish Parliament and the Executive authority over equal opportunities, abortion law, speed limits, gaming machines, an air passenger duty, income tax rate changes, and the laws on the franchise for Scottish Parliament elections. So you may know that 16 and 17-year-olds have been able to vote since 2014. So what we've seen in those years from 1998 onwards is a significant increase in the authority and the powers of the Scottish Parliament and the Executive in Scotland. And that has come sort of in hand with growing nationalism and growing calls for independence. So what we're going to do on the next slide is we're going to cover some of the key areas of legislation that are different in Scotland to the rest of the UK, and we're also going to look at this growing nationalist mood in Scotland. So the Scottish Parliament has passed over 300 pieces of legislation in its lifetime, and one that students always tend to remember is tuition fees. In the year 2000, tuition fees were free for Scottish students studying at a Scottish university. Now that has since changed. So as of 2023, Scottish students will pay £1,820 per year as a Scottish resident taking an undergraduate degree at a Scottish university. So if you were born in Aberdeen and you're going to Edinburgh to study your undergraduate degree, you'll pay just over £1,800 a year. If you come from Cardiff or Leeds, you're going to be paying £9,250 a year. And if you come from outside of the UK as an international student, you'll pay even more. In 2020, there was a court case. Sorry, I've got the year wrong there. That's not 2020, that's 2022. So in 2022, there was a court case in the Court of Session in Scotland. And that was because to be eligible for reduced tuition in Scotland, you had to have been living in Scotland for 7 years before you were the age of 18. Now, two students and many others had complained and campaigned for this, but two students took that case to the courts, and the Court of Session found that that law saying that somebody had to have lived in Scotland for 7 years prior to turning 18 to be eligible breached the European Convention of Human Rights, and so the law changed as a result in 2022. Now, as I said before, this method of devolution to Scotland hasn't come without its difficulties for both the Scottish people and the UK as a whole. In 2014, there was a referendum on Scottish independence, and you can see a campaigner for Scottish independence there. And comfortably, the no argument won. Now, to say that the 55% that voted for no were unionists and did not want an independent Scotland in any case and wanted rule from Westminster, to say that would not be accurate. Many people who voted no in that 55% to remain in the UK are supporters of devolution and believe that increased devolved powers is a better alternative to independence altogether. Now, in 2014, 16 to 17-year-olds were granted the right to vote in that referendum, and that was a power granted to them by the Scottish Parliament. Wales has followed suit, and in the video about Wales, you'll hear about how it was introduced in Wales. But if you are a Scottish citizen in that independence referendum and every Scottish Parliament election since, you are able to vote at the age of 16 and 17. And so if you're a 17-year-old in Scotland when an election rolls around, you could vote if it's for your MSP, but you still cannot vote for your MP. And you'll see at the bottom of the slide there, I've put IndyRef 2. Certainly after Brexit in 2016, there were calls for a second independence referendum. And it looked as though the independence movement was gaining support because the Scottish people voted to remain in the European Union, but as part of a wider United Kingdom, Scotland left the EU. And so the SNP were arguing that an independent Scotland would rejoin the European Union. And for a time, it seemed as though independence was on an upward trajectory. However, things have since changed. At the time of recording in 2023, the independence movement has begun to falter. Nicola Sturgeon left office as First Minister, and actually on the day that this is being recorded, which is the 5th of April 2023, Nicola Sturgeon's husband has been arrested, and he is linked with supposed criminal activity regarding the SNP's finances. And there has been a split within the party between supporters of different candidates for the leadership in the wake of Nicola Sturgeon's resignation. And so in 2017, 2018, there was a significant call from the nationalist community in Scotland for another referendum. But as at the time of recording in 2023, those calls don't seem as strong now as they did 5 years ago.